Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is Canada's most irreverent talk show, the Andrew Lawton Show on True North. I've been plugging it all week, but you know what? If you can't handle it, then you probably aren't watching the show anyway. My book, Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life, is now out. I'm mentioning that in particular right now because this is actually a pre-recorded episode. It's not a rerun. It's new. It's fresh. But I am on the road right now. I actually have an event in Ottawa, which by all accounts is, I'll give you the full report when I'm back, but it sold out very quickly. They moved it to another room and then it sold out again. So I didn't think Ottawa would be the city to welcome me so warmly of all the ones on the tour, but it is, and I know some of you might be coming out yourself, but we are having a little book launch event there. So in the meantime, because I'm on the road, I wanted to deliver some evergreen content, because the two things we can always accept are that the media is just out of touch with the realities of the world, and universities are out of touch with the realities of the world and their mandate, which I think is supposed to be one that upholds academic freedom. So I'm going to take a look at these two big picture issues on this show. We'll talk about academic freedom a little bit shortly with Geoff Horsman, a professor from Wilfrid Laurier University. But I wanted to begin by delving into the media. So last week, and we talked about this on Off the Record, William Macbeth, Harrison Faulkner, and I, City News Vancouver, you may have seen, had posted this rather distorted anniversary post on X about the announcement of unmarked graves at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. It was a post that they ended up walking back. They made some changes to the story. They stripped the reporter's byline off because they had very much distorted and torqued what had been announced and what had happened. They claimed that bodies had been discovered. No such bodies have been found. And even the band itself, the Kamloops band, has walked back its initial claim that there were bodies there by saying now that the ground penetrating radar actually discovered anomalies, which could be unmarked graves. And I don't want to rehash all of this. You can watch that episode of Off the Record if you're so inclined. My colleague Candace Malcolm has also done a lot on this, and True North published a book called Grave Error that was edited by CP Champion and Tom Flanagan that has essays on this very subject. But if we bring this back to basics here, there was a profound media malfeasance that took place in 2021 around this issue. It was the media adopting a narrative without question, without inquiry, that then led to the political class and the political establishment doing the same. And if you say that truth is the first casualty of war, in this case, we didn't even need war to consequently sacrifice truth. There was an agenda that was put front and center. And by the way, I am not putting any ill will at all onto the Indigenous people in Kamloops. I am not defending residential schools. I'm saying that if we're going to have an honest and fair discussion about the legacy, about how we go from where we go from there and how we do that, we need to be grounded in facts. And there was a lot of sensationalist reporting, and then media turns around and wonders why it has such a chronic lack of trust among its consumers. Could there perhaps be a little bit of a secret there to how media can save itself that doesn't rely on government bailouts? Well, I wanted to delve into that with Peter Menzies. He's been on the show a number of times, a former vice chair of the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission, but also the author of a fantastic Substack called The Rewrite, which had a great piece there. Shockingly irresponsible reporting on residential school cemeteries will drive the nation's news industry into oblivion. It's a very important piece for you to read. I think you should subscribe to The Rewrite anyway and heed the words of Peter Menzies, who joins me now. Peter, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming back on the show here.
Thanks for pumping my tires, and thanks for having me on your show.
Well, they are well deserving of the pumping. This piece you had the other day, I found quite powerful. Shockingly irresponsible reporting on residential school cemeteries will drive the nation's news industry into oblivion. You and I have spoken on a number of occasions about the regulatory environment right now we see for the media, and basically increasingly news companies looking at the government and seeing subsidies as their way through. But you go right back to basics here, really, and say, well, hang on, your coverage itself is hardly the stuff of legend right now.
Yeah, there's some fundamentals of journalism that get ignored, and they got terribly ignored in the initial reporting of these events regarding the Kamloops Residential School and the incorrect release that was sent out by the band at the time that has since been corrected, but nobody wants to do it. And one of those is assumptions. It's right at the basis of good journalism is don't allow yourself to be ruled by assumptions. Don't make any assumptions. And the other one that I didn't mention too much in here, but I will be getting to eventually with the rewrite because it's about journalism principles, is, check things out. Like the old Chicago City Bureau phrase that I was taught as a young aspiring journalist is like, check it out, check everything out. Like if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And none of that was done. And then the prime minister behaved incredibly irresponsibly and blew the whole thing up. And now we've got, this history based on unproven news sources.
Yeah, and I think therein lies the issue here. The original claim made by, to go back to the beginning here, made by the Kamloops band was one that they did eventually soften, but it was not what the media reported it to be. I mean, the New York Times was one of the most exceedingly irresponsible when they took this and reported on mass grave, which is a very specific meaning, but Canadian media as well. They took a lot of these claims at face value. None of the rigor and inquiry that would go to a claim made by anyone else of that nature occurred there. And I must say, as someone who's observed this for a while, how much did that surprise you, or did it not?
Sadly, it didn't surprise me. I mean, there's no question that there's issues about unmarked graves. Like in my piece that you mentioned, I was there in just outside Regina when, the old cemetery of the Regina Indian Industrial School was basically reclaimed and honored, and markers put on the graves of children who died there. Children died at residential schools. There is no proof. There are many allegations that have been thrown around, some very wild, about priests decapitating babies and all kinds of things that got reported without being checked. And those are very, very serious allegations, right? If people, may remember certain things in certain ways and that sort of stuff. And, you don't want to get in. And that's probably where the reporters fell down. They're afraid to challenge it, but you have to at least ask, do you have any proof for that? Right? No. This is just part of my memory. Well, that's not good enough for reporting. So if you really want to get into it, if there really were priests decapitating babies, then you get into that story. Get to work on it. If there weren't, then don't get into printing unfounded allegations. Like I said, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Find other people who believe that.
You have a comment in the piece I wanted to quote because I found it I actually found it quite meaningful. You said, "There is no room here for allyship other than to the truth," unquote. And why that stood out to me is because increasingly you have voices saying that the media needs to start doing all of these things that look a lot more like taking a side in a particular culture war. Media needs to commit itself to the principles of reconciliation, say. Media needs to commit itself to the principle of social justice. Media needs to be anti-racist. Media needs to be anti-oppressive. And a lot of these things, they sound nice on the surface, but at its core, you have a fundamental inversion here of what was supposed to be the guiding principle of journalism and was for a great many years, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's the truth part of that, truth and reconciliation, right? You can't reconcile until you've understood the truth, right? That everybody has to. And like I said, there's some terribly sad stories.
No, absolutely, no argument for me.
All this, and it's such an important issue that's what I'm sort of crying out for. Is we need grown-up journalism. We need people who will search for the truth, give us information we can trust. Don't lead people to conclusions. Don't begin with assumptions. Don't begin with allyship or for any side. Don't begin as a defender of the Catholic Church, or the Presbyterian Church or the Anglican Church or any of the others that were involved, or the government. Don't begin as a defender from the other perspectives. Be a defender of the reader. Be a defender of the reader's right to be informed fully and properly from the truth, and do your job. And the many journalists did in this were shabby and quite disgraceful, really. And we're 3 years later, and everybody's still pretending that they didn't do the bad job that they did.
And you also touch on another unrelated issue, but related in the overarching sense, in the weaponization of fact checks. And, on one hand, media asserting itself as being the authority on truth, but still doing what we used to learn in, first year philosophy as the appeal to authority of taking, this person that I've designated as an official source says this, therefore that's the truth. You raised one example here of a so-called fact check on Bill C-63. This is the online harms bill, the bill that reintroduces hate speech to the Canadian Human Rights Act. And this bill has been subject to a lot of misinformation, I think, from the government. The government has tried to downplay what the bill itself says. But you note here that Canadian Press just took a Justice Department official at face value to declare someone else guilty of misinformation.
Yeah, that's really, really surprising, right? I mean, that reporter generally does some fairly good stuff, and to see CP doing a fact check on a government bill and just going to the government official to clarify is, like you said, it's this sort of deference to authority, which you see all too often in journalism. I mean, the whole point of having a robust journalistic sector is that it challenges people in authority. In terms of that. So in an issue like this, where you're trying to understand a piece of legislation, the Department of Justice will, of course, have its point of view on what it says, and they need to be included. But there are other experts, like I pointed out, David Fraser, Michael Geist, Philip Palmer, who somebody should check with in terms of what the bill actually says. Because there have been instances in the past with Bill C-11, for instance, when the minister at the time was Pablo Rodriguez, was insisting that user-generated content isn't covered in the act, and you could read the act, and it was like right there, right? So, just fair to say that government officials don't always give you the straight goods. So it was an odd place to go to get the straight goods.
Yeah, fair enough. So to bring this back to the fundamental problem facing journalism, I agree there are market realities that have nothing to do with how good or bad an outlet is, that are forcing newspapers to change the way they do things, TV and radio. There is a profound trust deficit in the media. If the media were to deal with all of this and they were regaining the trust of their readers, their viewers, their listeners, whatever the case may be, how much of the business problem does that solve in your view? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it more?
Oh, that's a tough question in terms of, if you regain trust. I'm not even sure you can regain trust once you lose it. Like, trust is one of the, piece of social capital. Like we all know, and from our personal lives, if you lose somebody's trust, how do you get it back? It takes a long time. It takes a very long time. And I think it can be rebuilt. But for our news business, I think we're going to need some very good supervision. I think we need to get back to the attempt to conduct objective work, the not working from assumptions, not being an ally of any side except for the reader, in terms of that, and the truth. And once you do that, then you have to do it over and over and over again for a considerable period of time before you regain trust. You can probably get it back up to 50%. Trust in media has never been super high, for that matter, but it's because everybody has their own. Everybody reads through their own biased lens. But 50% would be sustainable for the industry.
Yeah, and I guess therein lies the problem, is that you have, I think, a fair bit of ignorance from many media companies about the fact that they need a desperate reinvention of their business model. I mean, not to say that True North is the way to go, but True North has found a way that works and we're growing. Rebel News has found a way that works and is growing. The Hub, the Western Standard. I mean, these are all relatively young organizations, but they're doing something right that doesn't involve finding some massive legislative incursion that's going to transfer money from government or force the transfer of money from companies like Facebook and Google and these big players. And again, I'm sympathetic to the reporters that, set out to, work for the town newspaper, which has a very, very precarious future. But there is no reinvention if the government is just keeping this thing strung along. And I mean, at the very least, these companies could show that they're looking in the mirror and sort of realizing what you've been saying for the last few moments. So what you said in the piece here, that, okay, maybe we at least need to look at what we're doing first.
Yes. Well, I mean, in that instance, like the Canadian Press one, I found it really kind of shocking because it's kind of like, guys, read the room. Like people are mistrusting you because of all this government funding, right? And they're going to be looking for examples that look like you're being a government mouthpiece. So for heaven's sake, don't be a government mouthpiece. And that's exactly what that did in terms of that. It's really a challenge right now, I think, because journalism schools are graduating a lot of students that have been kind of indoctrinated in this. Well, we don't need to seek objectivity. I hear it all the time. Objectivity is impossible, right? Sort of this thing like that. So we're going to give up on it. That's a terrible approach, right? There's all kinds of things that are very, very hard to do. Can you imagine if somebody sitting on the bench, a judge or a justice, sort of said, "I don't think it's possible to be fair-minded, so I'm just going to give up on it." Right? I mean, society would collapse if people lost faith in the judiciary, that person sitting there, that woman or man behind the bench isn't doing their utmost to be fair. And if journalists sort of run around and say, we're abandoning objectivity, I mean, you can have your commentary slant however you want. If you want to be the Toronto Star, and as they have always been, proudly, left of center, or if you want to be the National Post, which is proudly right of center, or True North, or Rebel, or Rabble, or wherever you want to be, I think people don't mind that. But when you do the news, you better get it straight, because people need to trust that they are getting that all of the information they need to organize their lives properly, and when they express their knowledge of an event, that they're expressing full knowledge of an event.
Yeah, I think you're very right there. And I would actually go one step further on the objectivity thing, because you have some people that say objectivity itself, it's not that it's a great idea that's hard to do. Some people say objectivity itself is this old, passe, antiquated concept. I mean, we've seen that on Israel reporting, for example. There's a subset of activist journalists that say, oh, no, you can't be objective when genocide is occurring or something like that, not realizing that is not a neutral, objective fact, that they believe journalists should, to go back to what you said about allyship to the truth, pick a side in things.
Yeah, you can't use the term, when I see the term activist journalist, I think you can't call yourself a journalist if you're an activist. You can be.
Which one are you?
But yeah. I mean, you can be a good writer, and you can be a good, keeping a good journal of events through your eyes in terms of media. I mean, that goes back years and years. Jack Reed did that with the Russian Revolution. You probably may have seen the movie Reds in terms of that. I mean, he was writing for all kinds of newspapers in the States, but he wasn't objective. He was really part of the revolution in terms of that. And, some stories that should have been told weren't told. But so that's not new, but I don't consider that journalism. I consider it writing, recording of events and that sort of stuff. But I don't think you can use activist and journalist in the same term unless your activism is being a journalist.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. Not all writers are journalists. That's true. I mean, I deliberately take a broad view of what journalism is, if only because I don't want government deciding what journalists are, because I wound up in federal court to make that case and I won. So.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
anyway, it was a fascinating piece you wrote over at The Rewrite by Peter Menzies. Peter, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today and for your wisdom and insights on this.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your interest, and thanks for having me on your show again. Much appreciated.
Always good to talk to our good friend, Peter Menzies. Thanks again, Peter, for coming on the show. And do head over. I just love Substack, by the way. I do my own Substack, andrewlawton.substack.com, but I love it because it's, apart from X, it's like one of the only platforms around now that loves free speech. And unlike X, you don't see like just spontaneous pornography everywhere on Substack. That's like one of the downsides or upsides. I'm not judging, depending on what you go for, but that's one of the downsides of the Elon Musk X, is that everything it's a free for all on in all sorts of ways. But we'll switch from journalistic ethics to the academic realm here. I have always put a spotlight on academic freedom. I'm a member of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. I'm not really a scholar anymore. I almost did a master's degree this year. That's another issue entirely. But I do absolutely value academic freedom and open inquiry. And I've had a great chance to chat about it casually with my next guest, Professor Geoff Horsman, who's with Wilfrid Laurier University, which of course has been the hotbed of this very discussion. It's where my colleague Lindsay Shepard infamously got into a bit of trouble there. Geoff, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you are the one of the co-chairs of the Heterdox Academy campus community at Laurier, and you had alerted me to an event that you had coming up, which I want to talk to you about here, and also some of the broader issues in heterodox in the academy here. But you've decided to put a spotlight on the Ministry of Education in Ontario. Explain.
Well, what we're interested in really is some of the profound changes that have been occurring in K through 12 education over the last probably couple of decades, sort of quietly, and probably in the last 5 years or so, and certainly since the pandemic, parents have really started to notice dramatic changes. And we've got a couple of scholars from OISE. This is the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, to come and talk to us about some of these trends that have been happening, some of the competing policy models that have been behind these changes, and really just engage in a real data-driven, empirical discussion about these educational changes, which really has been lacking on campus. So I think this is an opportunity for people to actually get a chance to hear from some experts and ask some questions and learn.
Yeah, I mean, I know Jamil Giovanni, who's now a Conservative member of Parliament. In his acceptance speech, he talked about the woke liberals, basically, that have infiltrated the Ontario education system. And what a lot of people found so shocking about that is that there's a Conservative government in Ontario, at least nominally so. And what's interesting is that a lot of these issues tend to prosper irrespective of who's in power. I mean, there seems to be this education bureaucracy that basically gets free reign over these sorts of issues.
Yes, I think it is. It really is. It's kind of this permanent staff, I think, that occupy multiple levels of the bureaucracy. I think, first of all, the Ministry of Education itself. I think many people are surprised that this infiltration of this social justice policy worldview is occurring under a Conservative government in the province of Ontario, and that really reflects, I think, just the permanent staff that don't really change with government, and it's unclear how much they really take direction from the politicians, or how much the politicians are motivated to make these changes. And then also the schools of education themselves, I think, are really dominated by this ascendant social justice worldview. Most of the younger professors especially are openly advocating for social justice education. So, there's these different levels. And of course, the unions is another important piece of this puzzle. They are quite openly picked an ideological side as well. So you really have it from a variety of fronts that are pushing this.
I recall going back to when I was a student, there was certainly some empowerment there of, I had teachers that were saying, you can go and, build a well in Africa like this young guy did, or you can go and, change the world by inventing this. You can discover the cure for cancer. There was certainly an activation of young minds, which, I'm just sitting behind a microphone in my basement. Other of my classmates have done far more impressive things. But now there's like a different type of activation taking place. And I know you mentioned this when you announced the event, that social justice is about training students, to use your words, to be, quote, activists of revolutionary change, unquote.
Right. Well. To be clear, those aren't my words. These are actually words of the people who of the OISE experts
Yes,
helped
yes.
craft that. But so they probably can tell you a lot more about this. But I think really what they're referring to is that there is this idea, and I think this is the social justice idea in education, is that we have a variety of things that we need to correct in the world, right? Really, it is an oppression, a world of different types of oppression that we need to correct. And really, we need to teach students to work to overcome these various types of oppression. So there's an anti-oppression sort of mindset in this critical pedagogy that is seeping through things. So I think that's one of the underlying features of the new educational policy direction.
I know when I started talking about these issues, however many years ago it was, there was always this hiving off of sociology departments, and the postmodernists are doing this, and the sociologists are doing this. It really is everywhere now. I mean, you're in the hard sciences, you're in chemistry and biochemistry. So just before the interview started, I just Googled decolonizing biochemistry to see what came up, and the first hit: decolonizing and diversifying the biosciences curriculum, why we need to decolonize the biosciences curriculum, decolonization in the faculty of science, a place to start, decolonizing chemistry teaching and learning. Now, I don't know what's in any of these resources. I'm just rhyming off the headlines here, but suffice it to say, unless, Avogadro was an evil, dirty, stinking colonialist, I'm not entirely convinced that there is a connection between colonization and chemistry, but even your hard sciences has not been immune from this.
No, it's not. I mean, it. I think for the most part, it has been, but it's coming. You can see it in different ways. There are different steps that are coming. I believe you talked to Lee Revers, maybe, and certainly in his department, it seems to be perhaps more advanced than it is at ours. But certainly, there is a push for it. There's a push to decolonize. No one really can define exactly what that means. There's no.
I was going to say, if you were to just go social justice, Geoff, and you say, okay, I'm all in. What does that even mean to decolonize chemistry? Like how do you even do that?
That's a really good question. I mean, Lee has talked about this a little bit. I think he's trying to think about this. And I don't know. I mean, it really just ends up being a little bit silly when you start to do it, because it would be more about using words that are not oppressive, right? So trying to change the language, maybe, with cis trans isomerization, you might not want to use that language because that could be offensive. So you'd use things like the E and Z isomers. It might be that type of thing, but I mean, ultimately no one really knows. And I don't think anyone's thought about it, to be honest. Maybe some people have, but most people are just scared to challenge it. And that's about all we know.
So we have seen in the last few years, I think, this tremendous resurgence of people like you who are really minded towards academic freedom. I mean, Jordan Peterson's probably one of the most famous anywhere in the world, but by no means is he the only one. I know at Laurier, you've got a small contingent of rabble-rousers, of heterodox thinkers. I've had a few of them on the show, David Haskell and Will McNally and yourself. And I know at other schools there are. So in some way, there seems to be a bit more of a resistance now. Would you say things are better or worse now than, say, 5 years ago?
I think it's a good question. 5 years ago, I didn't even pay attention to this much. So I might say things were better 5 years ago. But when I started to notice, 3 years ago, I thought things were very dire. But what I have noticed in the past year or two is that people are starting to find one another and they're starting to just speak again. I think in the lockdowns, when people were apart and isolated, they all thought if they were worried about some of these things, they thought they were the only ones. But when you start speaking and you start meeting other people, and then when you start being able to discuss and try to challenge each other and try to find people to explain what exactly do things like decolonization mean, what exactly, what are the benefits of hiring based on race and sex? Can anyone explain this? And very often you find that the explanations are very unsatisfactory. And I think people are really starting to realize that, and they're starting to get a little bit of courage, just a little bit. But I think as long as we can explain politely and make our case with evidence and write letters and try to open up that Overton window again so that we can actually do science in the broadest sense, where we hear both sides of an issue so that we can really try to get to truth. And what I would say about the green shoots, so to speak, or the optimism I feel, is that our Heterdox Academy group is growing. And we do have more and more active members. And I think that is really positive. We're starting to, other people from other universities, from the public are getting interested. So I think it is really starting to have an impact. And the fact that we're able to just have discussions on campus that you wouldn't have been able to have a couple of years ago, I don't think. And, it hasn't been easy. We often have to do security reviews and you get in, you kind of have trouble in small ways. But I think it's hard now for the administration to really shut it down in a way that they could have a short time ago. I think just too many people are not behind them anymore. I think the public, I think you talked to Eric Kaufman a few days ago on your show, and his work on the polling data is super clear that the public is just not on board with this stuff. So I really think we now have an opportunity now for a full court press to really push back and hopefully reestablish classical liberal norms of a liberal democratic society.
Yeah, and I think it's good because I had Bruce Party on recently, and he's just the perennial pessimist on this. So I like that you offer a bit more of a rosy picture of things. And there is something to the idea that it has to get worse for people to see how bad it is and want to make it better. I've always been a subscriber to that. The problem is that when you think you've hit rock bottom, somehow it manages to get a little bit worse at times. But the one thing that I also find encouraging is that universities have learned now, perhaps not all of them and perhaps not as much as they should, but they've learned that there is a cost to censoring. There's a cost to shutting things down. There's a cost to targeting people because there is a whole group of people that are all too willing to stand up and point the finger at them and say, what did you do there? And I mean, your school has been subject to, I think now, years of litigation going on because of the Lindsay Shepherd thing. And while the school hasn't just, done the complete apology and, everything yet, there's been a cost to doing what it did. And I think other schools as well have probably looked at that and said, maybe I don't want to treat that TA the same way that Laurier treated Lindsay Shepherd. And that I think is very crucial here. And that's where I get to play my tiny little role in the independent media in showcasing these stories, because there needs to be a cost if you go and trample on academic freedom, I think.
Yes, I think they're starting to realize that a little bit. I mean, it just takes a few people, like us to, again, write a few letters. They know, okay, this is going to be embarrassing if people start paying attention to this. But I would just like to, if any administrators are listening, this is an opportunity. I think right now, if you're a university administrator, you have a tremendous opportunity because young people are getting really tired of the social justice worldview at universities. I can't tell how many students talk to me about this is just so boring, this whole thing. I'm really tired of it. So I really do think that if a university administrator is really smart, this is what they do. They would come out, we're going to be the first, we're going to be a true free speech university. We're done with the EDI, the racial discrimination. That's all over. If you want to learn, if you want to do hard things and you want to be competent and you want to explore ideas, you come to our university. And I think the first mover opportunity is just huge. I don't know why someone doesn't just reach out and grab it and come in.
There have been a couple in the US that have, but in Canada, that lane is just wide open, right. Isn't it?
It is. It's wide open. All the universities are almost identical on this. So.
All right. Well, if you're, I'm not sure how many university administrators we have in our ranks in the audience, but if you know one, or perhaps you're married to one, go and show them this episode. They could be the star. It's funny you mentioned that. So I don't know if you remember a couple of years back when the Toronto Public Library defended its right to rent space to, I think it was Megan Murphy. It was this one librarian, Vickery Bowles, I'll always remember her name, who was like the librarian standing athwart history, yelling "stop" to the censors. And and I'll always remember her until maybe not the end of time, but certainly the end of my time because of that. So there could be a university administrator that does the same thing, that becomes just like the beacon of freedom and free speech and academic inquiry in Canada. So
the opportunity's there. Just take
it. You deliver the inspiration. The event hosted by the Heterdox Academy at Wilfrid Laurier. What is the Ministry of Education promoting in our schools? You can see the details up on the screen there. It is on Thursday, June 13th. I'm going to be out of town, but I hope it goes well, and I expect to get a full report afterwards. But Professor Geoff Horsman, good to talk to you. Thanks so much, Geoff.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
All right, that does it for us for today. We'll be back with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show on True North tomorrow. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.